Successful exit from the IMF agreement.
It was a program that tested our own resolve to be true to our own real economic interests.
$14 billion stimulus tax package.
After almost 20 years of consistent tax increases and no new taxes last year, it is now time to give back. It is a right thing to do.
Consecutive economic growth and record-breaking low unemployment. These are just some of the achievements of the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service in 2019. Stick around for the details. A major achievement for the Ministry of Finance in 2019 was Jamaica's successful exit in November from the International Monetary Fund IMF Precautionary Standby Agreement. Through the implementation of strict fiscal policies, the country passed all 6 reviews without pulling down any funds from the $1.63 billion made available.
We have worked with transparency. We have worked diligently to ensure that we meet all the targets that we have set for ourselves.
Through a Memorandum of Understanding, the Economic Program Oversight Committee, EPOC, will continue monitoring the reforms until an independent fiscal council is established.
These decisions are a clear demonstration of the government's commitment and intent to maintain a credible macroeconomic path.
Among the achievements, reducing the rate of debt to gross domestic product, maintaining consecutive quarters of economic growth and low inflation, as well as consumer and business confidence. Unemployment also dropped to a record low of 7.8% in 2019, while employment rose to a high of over 1.2 million, and the workforce population increased to 69.7% of citizens.
And we owe it to the Jamaican people to preserve these gains, to build on these gains, even as we work towards addressing other challenges. Finance is the oxygen of business.
That's why in March 2019, government introduced a $14 billion stimulus tax package to increase business and economic activities. This saw small businesses benefiting from an increase in the annual GCT threshold to $10 million. Further tax cuts included doing away with the asset tax payable by non-financial institutions, as well as the minimum business tax payable by all registered companies. In addition, transfer tax on financial instruments was reduced to 2%, while the transfer tax threshold applicable to the estate of deceased persons was increased to $10 million. The ad valorem stamp duties were cut and replaced with a flat rate of $5,000 per document.
This will allow for greater mobility of assets, which is consistent with our drive for economic growth.
After this massive $14 billion giveback and a budget of $803 billion, the government looked to revenues, grants, and existing taxes to finance the operation of the country. By July, the government had pulled in $202 billion in revenues and grants for the April to July 2019-2020 fiscal period. $50 billion were later added to the budget in the first supplementary estimates. To further stimulate growth among micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises (MSMEs), $1.8 billion was made available for loans. Funds were dispersed through the Ministries of Economic Growth and Finance. As the government put these measures in place, it also tabled the Microcredit Act 2019 to regulate the sector.
The Microcredit Act, Mr. Speaker, seeks to bring regulation to that sector to ensure that Jamaicans are not subject to predatory lending practices.
Following this, the Income Tax Amendment Act 2019 was approved by the Senate in June, making allowance for the purchase and renovation of industrial buildings for trade. In 2019, Jamaica's credit ratings reached an all-time high. Fitch Ratings Agency upgraded Jamaica's long-term foreign currency and local currency issuer default rating to B+ from B. The agency also upgraded the country ceiling to BB- from B and revised the outlook to stable from positive. A similar rating was given by Standard & Poor's. The Bank of Jamaica (BOJ) made adjustments to its operations including changing of the guard. Richard Biles succeeded Brian Winter in August. Fiscal changes included lowering the central bank's policy interest rate on deposit-taking institutions' overnight placements to 0.5%, reducing cash reserve requirement to 9%, releasing $16.8 billion to deposit-taking institutions. The BOJ also guided the signing of the Foreign Exchange Global Code by key financial market stakeholders. It provides a common set of guidelines for all authorized foreign exchange trading entities and promotes the integrity, transparency, and effective functioning of the foreign exchange market. When the US dollar gained on the local currency in November, this prompted the BOJ to sell $90 million to authorized dealers and cambios to increase supply and bring normalcy to the foreign exchange market. At the end of the year, the central bank's net international reserves stood at over $3 billion. To safeguard economic gains made under the Economic Reform Program, government established a Natural Disaster Contingency Fund and deposited $2 billion Jamaican dollars. Minister Clark moved a resolution to raise the ceiling of the contingency fund from $100 million to $10 billion to provide space for future transfers related to natural disaster risk coverage. The United States Agency for International Development, USAID, provided a $5 million grant. The money is for the finalization of a policy for the public financial management of natural disaster risk to support financially resilient products and offset the cost to procure instruments.
What we want to do is we want to ensure that we have access to non-budgetary resources that can be drawn down on, that can be utilized in the event of such occurrences.
Meanwhile, a $140 million loan was received from the World Bank to strengthen three key economic safeguards. These include building the country's resilience against natural disaster risks, supporting human capital development, and strengthening the social safety net for the most vulnerable.
We have to democratize capital, and it only responds to ideas.
Minister Clark's statement put into action $200 million through the Development Bank of Jamaica to finance business and entrepreneurial programs at tertiary institutions. Meanwhile, borrowers of the Students' Loan Bureau got a 2% reduction in interest rate, while individuals employed full-time to charitable organizations received a 10% cut on the loan balance. Government also allocated a $3 billion grant support to the SLB.
The government is focused on increasing accessibility of tertiary education, as this is a promising means by which economic opportunity can be expanded.
On the matter of pension reform, government is working to have the pension plan regulations in place in 2020. This follows approval by the Senate of the Pensions, Superannuation Funds and Retirement Schemes Investment Amendment Regulations 2019. Government also signed a contract for over $1.5 million to review and develop a proposal for a new public sector compensation structure. The implementation of shared corporate services under the Public Sector Transformation Program will begin January 2020, following the signing of a $5.45 million contract. The Ministry of Finance and the Public Service, making the growth process equitable and inclusive, increasing access to financing, and facilitating opportunities through public, private, bilateral, and multilateral partnerships.